All right, welcome to Power Focus Area 2, the illegal wildlife trade, the second objective. In objective 1, we talked mostly about what the illegal wildlife trade was and why it's harmful. Today, we're going to kind of focus on what's being done to help prevent it and hopefully ultimately stop it. So what is being done? Well, one way that we protect species in the wild is to help prevent the illegal wildlife trade is to have protected areas, things like national parks and nature reserves, places that you're not allowed to take anything out of, no animal, no plant, nothing. It's protected area entirely. And people like rangers and managers and anti-poaching specialists work there to help patrol and make sure the best they can that no poaching, nothing is taken out of there. It's very hard, but we'll talk about some of the strategies they do use. Here's a national park in Africa called Gorongosa National Park. One of the projects we'll be doing later this year focuses on Gorongosa National Park. I really love that project, but it's a lot easier and better done in person, so I'm going to do it a little later this year. How do we train the rangers that work at these national parks and reserves? One way that they help kind of coordinate is called SMART. And you can read what it stands for there, but as long as you know what SMART is, not what it stands for, you'll be okay. The SMART approach is a tool that collects information about wildlife populations and helps manage anti-poaching patrols. In other words, it tells, based on past poaching efforts, rangers and managers when and where that they should focus their patrol efforts to maximize their efforts of reducing the illegal wildlife trade by poaching. And there's also something called the Zero Poaching Toolkit. It describes the things that are needed to achieve zero poaching for a 12-month period. So a country actually had this a whole year of no poaching at all. And they kind of came up with the guidelines that if you follow would help your parks as well avoid this. And the 6 areas are assessment, meaning find out where the areas are being affected the most. Technology, you got to use technology to cover such large areas, and we'll get into some more of those techniques in a second. Capacity, what's your ability? How many people do you have working for you? Things like that. Community, I'll come back to in a second. Prosecution, meaning what's the punishment? What laws are there in place if you catch somebody? And then cooperation. Now notice, the 2 that are starred are the most important, but most people would have guessed prosecution is the most important. Like, what are we going to punish them? If we punish them severely, they won't do it. And that's not really the case. The biggest and most effective techniques in achieving zero poaching, or at least minimizing the amount of poaching, is addressing the community and cooperating. And what I mean by that is, let's say there's a national park in a very poor area. People are struggling just to get by and find enough food. A lot of times poachers will come in, ask them to kind of help them, or maybe even tell them what they're looking for and have the community hunt for them. And if you need to eat to survive, you might be willing to kill an animal and sell it just so you're able to feed your family. So the way the Zero Poaching Toolkit approached that was, what they did is they started coming up with ideas like revenue sharing. If you live near a national park, and we will give you part of the money that the park makes. Well, that changes the outlook of the community members entirely. Now they're invested. They know if they help prevent people from poaching, more people will come visit the park, which means more money will be made, which means they will receive more money. Hiring people, cooperation. A lot of times, the Zero Poaching Toolkit recommends hiring people that live around there. So now you're giving them a job, a means, a way to make a living and have food for your family. So you're going to help prevent poaching that way. So again, engaging your community is super important. The people that live around have to be involved in the anti-poaching efforts for it to be successful long term. We said technology was one of those 6 areas, and it's important. You're trying to protect a huge area sometimes. You don't have the manpower necessarily to do it, and some of these areas are just out in the middle of nowhere. They have no cell phone signal. They have no reliable way to communicate at all, so you have to come up with some advances in technology, and they have. They use camera traps. If something walks by one of these cameras, it starts transmitting an image instantly by satellite. If nothing's moving, the camera's off, so it's saving its battery life. There's something called Instant Detect. It's a wireless sensor network that kind of acts like an invisible fence. Maybe you've seen somebody that their dog has a weird collar on, and if they go too far in the yard, they get shocked because there's an invisible fence there. It's the same idea, except these are more advanced. these wireless sensors can sense heat, sound, motion. They can even tell the difference between humans and animals. So if an animal walks by the sensor, it doesn't turn on, it doesn't trigger anything. But if a human does in an area they shouldn't be, that triggers it. So they know to send the patrol that way to kind of prevent the poaching. Here's some pictures of poachers taken with camera traps. They didn't see them. These cameras were just hidden on trees, maybe even on the ground. People walked by, click, pictures taken, and they're cut. There's something called wildlabs.net, which is kind of like, I don't want to say a blog, it's a little more complex than that, but it's kind of an online platform where conservationists can go and share things they've done that have helped reduce poaching, or they're struggling. We can't stop poaching, it's getting worse. And they can get advice or give advice depending if they're successful, or need advice if they've been having some troubles in their area. Some vocab terms that go with the illegal wildlife. In white there you see source countries. Source is where something comes from. So in this case, a source country is where the illegal wildlife animals or plants are found on their own. So you'd go there, and if they're taken out of their source country illegally, they're going to be transported to a new country. Trafficking means the illegal trade, really, of anything. But in this case, we're talking about wildlife. Maritime, well, that means kind of water. So maritime trafficking happens through water on boats. And this is the main way that big things, like big, large animals, are legally transported. I'm sure you've seen maybe on Instagram or TV, people with pet tigers, and a lot of those are illegal. But they got them through being transported by boat. So boat is the way that big stuff, big animals get transported. Plane is the way small stuff gets transported most often. Things like ivory or hippo teeth, even some animals, birds, turtles, things like that. One of the big problems, what makes it so hard to stop the illegal wildlife trade, is they're transported the same way as legal things. So we said tigers and big animals can be transported by boats illegally. Well, they are, but that same boat is probably transporting tons of legal products. Same with the airplanes. You might have somebody have some hippo teeth, which is illegal, transporting on an airplane. The airplane's transporting so many legal things, it's hard to catch these illegal items. They're also creating networks. The criminals know there's so much money to be made in the illegal wildlife trade. Remember, $50 to $150 billion a year. And the illegal traffickers are kind of creating networks where it's hard to detect, where they know that patrols aren't very often. And here's a picture, some sad but illegally transported wildlife here. Hope this helps with Objective 2. One more to go, and then we'll be ready for our content assessment.